Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Jim Cavey. I'm a growth director here at Seccl. Um, I'm really excited to be here. It's our first webinar that I've done here at Seccl since moving across 6 months or so ago from our sister company, Octopus Investments, where I used to work for about 13 years, speaking to many different advice firms. And the conversations I've had in the last 6 months since joining Seccl have been really exciting and really fascinating. So I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm also delighted to say I'm joined by our two excellent guest speakers. We have Nikki Seville from Woven Advice, and we also have Joe Harris from Alpha FMC. Now's probably a good chance for me just to say if anyone is having any technical issues, i.e. they can't hear me very well or they can't see the screen, then please do contact Octopus at events@seccl.tech and someone will be happy to help resolve those issues for you. Today's webinar is titled Whose Data Is It Anyway? It's based on a report that we put together a couple of months ago titled exactly the same. It's a really fantastic report. I think a few people dialed in today have read it. If you haven't and you want a copy, please do let us know and we'll get a copy of that over to you afterwards. But it is well worth a read. The session is designed to be, firstly, hopefully interesting, and secondly, and perhaps most importantly, helpful for you when you are thinking about technology, data, and just the general operational efficiency of your businesses. So hopefully you do find it a helpful session. What we're going to be covering off is why we here at Seccl believe that data ownership is becoming a strategic advantage for advice firms, why we think fragmented technology stacks can create operational drag, and why we believe if you can take control of data and technology and your operational efficiency, then it can unlock a lot of growth, scalability, and potentially capabilities that we are beginning to see from AI. So why did we put together the report? So we put together a report based on our experience of working with our existing client firms. So they have inputted into the report, as well as some of the excellent third-party companies that we do work with. Of course, Alpha and Woven did feed into that report, as well as some other companies such as Planner Technologies and Aveni. So it's all been fed into from lots of different angles and different people looking at it from different views and experiences. Right, the order of the day is a relatively straightforward one. So I will kick us off with a very brief introduction as to who Seccl are and why we felt the need to put together this report and touching on some of the key themes that came from it. I will then pass over to Joe to introduce himself and give a broad overview of this topic and what he's seeing in the market. I'll then do exactly the same, passing over to Nikki to introduce herself and get her view on everything data before we then move into hopefully a really interesting and interactive discussion. The session is live, so there is the ability to ask questions throughout. So please do ask questions through the question functionality on the Zoom webinar. My colleagues behind the scenes will be looking at those questions and feeding them through to me. I'll do my best to multitask, which I'm not renowned for doing, but I'll give it a good go. And so I will try and weave in some of those questions throughout the session or park them all to the end and run through those sessions until we get to about 11:15, where we'll look to wrap up. So hopefully that sounds a good agenda for us today. And as I said, please do ask questions because then you'll get the most out of it and from our excellent speakers. So who are Seccl? For those of you that don't know, so Seccl are an embedded investment platform. We power many advice firms' investment platforms under a Model B arrangement, often referred to as an advisor as a platform model. We are completely digital and built on modern technology. So we truly are API first. We are hyper efficient. We look to automate as much as we can. So we can help firms scale and grow and become much, much more operationally efficient. So, with that in mind, let's have a look at the. I'm just going to stop sharing before we pass over to Joe. So, let me just have a little think about why did Seccl look to build this report? So, we wanted to. We basically were getting a lot of questions from advice firms around, and there's a lot of chatter in the market about AI and how firms could best harness it, or what our views were on how that might reshape the market. That then got us thinking about that question in a slightly different way. And what we thought was actually making sure firms were getting their data foundations right was a lot more important if they really wanted to get meaningful potential out of any of the AI technology that they were adding on or bolting on to their companies. So we explored why we don't think AI is likely to be a standalone solution that's going to solve many, many problems. We thought the biggest questions were going to be around controlling the data, connecting the many, many systems that advice firms have added over the years properly, and building a technology stack that allows them to have some flexibility over the coming 3 to 10 years. We really wanted to help you and firms understand how greater control over their platform, infrastructure, and data can hopefully unlock better things like client experiences, stronger operational efficiency, and new ways to scale over the coming years. So, what were some of the key themes that came out of it? Well, there were a few things that we thought, well, what does what does the Holy Grail look like, and what does good look like? So some of those included potentially defining a clear source of truth for all data. As I just mentioned earlier, the ability to connect systems intentionally rather than adding them on over a number of years. Capturing data once and being able to reuse it across multiple workflows seemed very, very important and much more commonsensical. That in turn would help with automation and making sure that there's a reduction in duplication. What we also came up with, which I think is quite helpful, it's chapter 5, I believe, in the report, is our technical due diligence guidance, if you like, as to how you can review different technology providers and vendors that you're working with. So that is a bit of background as to Seccl and the report. Before I move into questions and discussion with Joe and Nikki, we thought it would be useful to do a quick poll. So could I just ask Gail, could you mind just firing up the poll? This will be useful for our feedback as a firm, and it will then also just help us shape the conversation over the next half an hour or so as well. So if I can just ask everyone to take the time to answer through these questions. So question number 1, where is your firm on its AI journey? Ranging from not exploring it at all to actively using AI. Question 2, how ready do you feel your data and technology foundations are for using that AI? And then question 3, if you needed to replace a core system tomorrow, how confident are you that you could quickly access and extract and trust all the data you need? I'll just give people a few seconds to think about those answers. Um, Gail or Will, hopefully you can see those answers coming in. So when you feel like we've got enough answers, feel free to close that poll. Bro, Thank you very much, everyone, for partaking in that. Let's see if the answers are what we expected or what I was expecting looking at this last night and this morning. Yes, I think that is pretty much as expected. So, first question number one, the majority of people are actively using AI now. I think that's probably not a massive surprise over the last year or two, and sort of piggybacking off the back of COVID, yeah, more and more firms are definitely using various different types of AI. So that's not a massive surprise. If we then go, albeit still only nearly 20% of people are only just looking to explore it. So being a bit more patient before launching into it. How ready do you think you are with your foundation? So again, I was expecting a slightly more mixed bag for this, um, which is what we're expecting, and it's probably why there were so many people keen to sign up to this webinar today. So hopefully, this is helpful. Most people somewhere in the middle of somewhat ready and mostly ready. Um, and then the last question, again, really mixed bag across across the board in terms of being able to change systems. I think that is very interesting. And as we move forward over the next few years, if you're not confident in that and things are changing at such a pace at the moment, then that's definitely something worth considering. Okay, right. So, with all that in mind, I think it's probably a good chance for me to hand over to Joe to introduce himself. So, Joe, if that's okay, do you mind? I guess before we go into the detail and discussion, if you could introduce yourself, and it would be great just to get your perspective on broadly the bigger picture. You're clearly speaking to many different advice firms of different shapes and variations. Be good to get your thoughts on where you think we're at today on data technology, that journey, what you think is working well, and what's changing, and I guess some of the biggest challenges. And I'll share my screen, and yeah, over to you, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and morning, everyone. Joe Harris, partner, Alpha FMC. So I lead all of our work from a technology perspective across our wealth and retail investment clients. So I think if I sort of look back at sort of the macro level view, Jim, as you've articulated, like my headline statement would probably be there's probably never been more capability in terms of the differing types of tools that a financial planning business can use. Um, but there's also never been more incoherence in terms of how those tools are actually leveraged to develop a suite of services and propositions that work for advisors and for clients. And that's probably my sort of my overarching view. If I think of the capabilities and sort of what we were trying to showcase across this slide is that there's a bunch of different components that sit within a technology stack, or we see as what you require within a technology stack across engagement, financial planning, tooling, your sort of client and process management. So actually, how do you sort of run the business, and then actually how do you ultimately fulfill? Like we believe that all firms will have an element of each of these, and actually there are so much choice within each of these. The challenge is how do you bring all of that together so that you can increase productivity for advisors, you can improve the client experience, and you can actually get an accurate data set to be able to report the performance and get the insight that you need to be able to move the business going forward. And I think that is really sort of the biggest challenge is that there is so much choice that people don't really actually understand how to bring all of this together. And people get very excited about a demonstration on a specific feature rather than necessarily thinking about the architecture that is required to be able to deliver the propositions and the operating model that advice firms are looking for. And so actually, sort of when we talk to firms and people start talking to us about cash flow modeling or sort of the latest CRM, actually we try and take a step back and go, look, what are the components that you need? But then what are those transversals that sit across the architecture? And so those three sort of dark blue boxes at the bottom, sort of we actually think are the fundamentals to being able to deliver a coherent experience across each of the different components that we have here. And really that's around how do you integrate those journeys, those experiences, those tools together to create that coherent service? How do you build your infrastructure in a way that enables you to trust the data that is going in and out of those services? And then how do you build an ecosystem that enables you to leverage innovative technology, including the use of agentic and generative AI solutions across the estate, rather than seeing that as a single point solution that sits within there? So I think, yeah, the headline, Jim, is there's a load of capability out there, but there's still confusion around how you stitch it all together.
Are there any, so from stitching it all together, are there any particular bits across those verticals or horizontals that you think firms are particularly struggling with stitching together?
So I think typically where we see it is actually around where there are overlapping capabilities within applications. And so the one that we typically see a lot is sort of your traditional advice CRM, and then sort of your sort of financial planning tools, and then into your sort of investment platform layer. Those are typically your three because they're all sharing the
Yeah.
same level of data. They all need to understand who the client is. They all need to understand what advice is being given, and then they need to understand the products, the valuations, the transactions that are being deployed. And so, where you've then got that data needing to be across three different solutions, and typically, actually, when it's in financial planning, we've got sort of five components there. Sometimes that's one, sometimes that's five, sometimes that's 15, right? Depending on how you've built your proposition, how you move and manage that data in terms of the mastery of that data and what needs to own it to then be passed down into the fulfillment layer to be able to actually execute on that advice. We see that as sort of the key challenge that firms struggle with.
Yeah, okay. And before I just pass over to Nikki and introduce herself, when you mentioned there people have been getting excited about various features and technology, where do you think firms have got most excited across this whole piece in adding layers of technology that have got bells and whistles?
Yeah, so I'm going to do the classic consulting answer, Jim, if it depends,
Yeah.
because there is no one size fits all. So I think like, there's a couple of trends, right? So I think obviously with the sort of SCA regulation specifically around sort of retirement advice and decumulation, I think people are starting to well, I think a lot of firms actually have identified that stochastic cash flow modeling is absolutely required to deliver financial planning and financial
Yeah.
advice. So I think there's quite a lot of interest in terms of how do you how do you dumb down a cash flow that enables you to have a really compelling value additive conversation with a client. So I think that's one that firms spend quite a lot of time talking about.
Yeah.
And I think the second one, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is AI, right? So in terms of how do we leverage artificial intelligence within the estate? Like I don't want to. So I'm sure sort of Nikki will touch on this, and we'll go further forward into this as we talk. But like AI, we shouldn't be looking at AI as a point solution, and we should be looking at it as a horizontal across our entire technology estate. But I think people got quite excited about transcription and meeting summarization.
Yeah.
If I'm brutally honest, that is now table stakes. Like if you don't have that, you're behind.
Yeah.
Actually, it's what people are starting to get excited about is the potential for agentic AI services to be able to transverse across the advice process. Now, I still think that we are some sort of months and years away from that being sort of fully embedded. And I'm sure again, Nikki will talk about some of the things that we need to solve to enable that. But I think that's where people, forward-looking firms, are starting to sort of really embrace what that could look like.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, as I said earlier, great to have you with us. So thanks for joining and thanks for that introduction. Nikki, again, thank you very much for joining us and nice to see you. Do you mind if I pose the same question to you, ask you to introduce yourself and yeah, just get your thoughts on broadly what Joe's just run through there, what resonates, anything you agree with, or dare I say, anything you disagree with as well?
So early in the piece. No, thank you. Thanks, Jim, for having me. Obviously, I'm for those of you who know me, this is my favorite topic. I've even worn my favorite t-shirt for the occasion, making Joe really jealous there.
I am jealous.
Um,
I am jealous.
for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nikki. I'm one of the founders of Woven Advice. We are a startup. We help financial advisors manage their data for the for the goal of achieving great client outcomes and great business outcomes, whether that's buying a firm, selling a firm, helping save money for clients through switching, helping deliver better advice. And we believe that stems from the data. Personally, I've been a data administrator. My first job was in data entry of saying the buys and sell transactions and technology in the early 2000s, all the way through to a financial planner, to then a technologist. I implemented CRMs for about 7 years before building Woven, where I thought there was a gap in the industry to help firms fix their data. So that's a bit of background on me. And now, Jim, can I ask you to bring that slide up? Because I absolutely love it. And
Yeah, sure.
Joe's slide there, if anyone didn't capture that before, it's a great one. And I'd love to talk a few points of that. I broadly
Let's
agree
come
with
up.
everything Joe said. For those of you also who haven't seen what we do a Woven market map, and we actually track a lot of the technology systems in the market. We've got over 160 software and some AI. Now we've kind of got a category: is it software or is it AI? But over 160 solutions that we track. And so when you see everything on this slide, you kind of start to slot it into what are all these options that all of these firms are working with. There's no surprises that we have a data problem, because every one of these boxes here have a number of systems that can be used. And over the years, particularly, early days where there was absolutely no integration, we have firms, we have individuals typing data into all of these systems separately, if they're typing it anywhere at all, and they're all mismatched and they're all out of line. So this is the exciting planning for how you might want your firm to be in the future, but we all know we've got a legacy problem that we still need to clean up. And I actually, while Joe was talking there, I pulled up a little conversation with Claude. Just kind of, I think I have this conversation quite regularly, but for this one, I said, okay, if we've got 160 different solutions, let's say there are 10 key systems, 10 key boxes that we need to fill, and let's say there are and I said, how many different variations of tech stacks are we going to get in this industry? And it came back with 1.1 trillion. And that sounded a bit big, rather than doing the mental maths myself. So I challenged it a bit, and it said, okay, let's assume that there are 3 key players in each of these boxes, and not 160 divided by 10, 16. So it came out with 60,000 different stacks. Now, even that, just, obviously the trillion is a bit beyond, but 60,000 different stacks that we are trying to homogenize in our industry for I guess economies of scale, because everyone wants to be individualized, unique. Every firm wants to run a bit differently, but at the same time, we also want to be able to run on similar rails so that we can all benefit from innovation. We can benefit from new AI. We can benefit from integration. And I think that's one of the things that AI has really shown, is that we're all trying to kind of work to the same goal, which is not AI, it's automation, and it's efficiency. But if your rails and your data aren't aligned for that, then it's very, very difficult. So I guess that's my big picture view of the world. In terms of this lovely slide here, probably I'd highlight that what we see, that kind of the darker layers down the bottom, we see those as opportunities to homogenize processes, homogenize the technology that's provided. We see that firms that are early adopters here, generally the big ones that have budgets to put into data and infrastructure, are speeding ahead. They're doing it their own way. They're doing it themselves, which is what you should be doing. But we think that there's an opportunity to bring that all together, as opposed to your engagement layer and your client process and management layer. Those are your personalization layers. Those are what make you as a firm, your experience, your client management process. That's what makes it you. And so those are the areas that you should be able to be a bit more creative, go off piste, look at different solutions, build different opportunities. But your data rails and your infrastructure should be more commoditized, should be more homogenized. Doesn't make it any easier. Don't want to trivialize it, but it should be consistent. We've got our financial planning and tooling layer there in the second column. That one's a regulatory led one. That doesn't need to be so bespoke. We all want our cash flow modeling to be consistent. We want the machine to work the same for everyone. We don't want to be getting different outcomes because that makes our jobs really hard with consumer duty. So putting that kind of perspective into the mix when you're thinking about software solutions, think selection, what you want to do is a lot of the way that I frame it.
Well, thank you, Nikki. Yeah, very much appreciate it. So going, if we start at the beginning, which I think is always a good place to start, and you've mentioned there that some firms you're speaking to have already sort of started that ball rolling with getting their infrastructure and data in place. There'll be lots of firms that haven't, as we saw from that poll from people that are joining on the webinar. Where would you say is a good place to start
Mm.
if you're looking at this for the first time or thinking about this for the first time, having built up a problem, as it were, over the past 5 years? Where would you say is a good place to start, and how would you go about getting that ball rolling?
Yeah. Um, So I think there's a really big difference around what firms are doing. You know, it comes from the top as what are the leaders asking for, but also it's a very big difference between what the size of the firm is. So you know, we'd see the smaller firms that are doing well here are leading the chase are the ones that had good data to start with. They were on top of their data processes. They had a really great foundation. Their back office, you know, it might not have been the best back office, but it was consistent. It's the data is correct, and they have been able to try different tech solutions, try building their own things in some instances, and be able to try different solutions to help with their problems. As you get into the bigger firms, even the most organized tend to still have big data problems because you're just working with a lot of data and you're working with a lot of legacy, and you don't really get to the size of a big wealth manager now without a few acquisitions. And as soon as you acquire firms, you're acquiring a lot of debt across the board. Obviously, the one I focus on is that data debt that you're inheriting. So what we saw is, or what we've seen is, some firms go really fast towards the AI route and working, collaborating with early stage AI companies,
Yeah.
trying to build solutions together, perhaps, or pilot. And then we've seen the other side of the fence is tends to be the firms that already have some data resource in house, where they highlighted the need to focus on data warehousing or data lakes early on in that piece, and we're able to prioritize that side rather than the AI side. Now, what are we like 3 years later, full circle round? They've kind of crossed over, right? The firms that prioritize the data piece are now starting to work on their AI solutions. Some of them are able to build them in house at this point, versus the other way around. The ones that started with the AI are now back to trying to fix their data legacy problem because they worked out that the AI wasn't really working. So that's, I guess, what I'm seeing at a big level. Joe, you're probably really involved in some of those early discussions, aren't you?
Yeah, and so I completely agree. I think the point, Nikki, that you mentioned around like a lot of data is absolutely spot. I don't see firms missing data. It's understanding sort of what's sort of the master and follower of that data is actually the key challenge that firms don't really understand around sort of a slight philosophical view of trying to sort of homogenize and centralize data, which I don't actually think is necessarily the right answer from an application layer. From a data layer, yes. From a data sort of warehouse or data lake, yeah, that makes sense. But actually, on an application layer, you don't need to have your single source of truth in your CRM. That's just not really how applications work. Like you need to understand where the masters of the data are, and then how you follow that data across the application estate, and where you can use automation integration to perform that where you can't because you're on legacy technology, which means that there's manual capabilities. What you need to do is ensure that you've got a clear data owner of those areas so that you can ensure that there is clear data quality. Otherwise, what will happen is you will have sort of misalignment of data. You'll then start to erode the trust in the data because it's not as accurate, and therefore people then start complaining that the data is not good enough. So I think there's sort of, for me, there are two elements on that data piece. One is around sort of integrate where you can, but sometimes you can't. And so where you can't, you need to make sure that you've got clear ownership at a field level of who owns that data.
So do you think, and this is a question, I guess, for both of you, is we talk about, you hear people talking about a source of truth for a single source of truth for data. So do you think that it's possible or realistic for firms, and maybe it depends on the type of firm or the size of firm, to have that single source of truth? Or is it better having um, yeah, connected data that is being able to talk to each other and being utilized across different applications. What's your views on a source of truth of data?
I
Go on,
think,
Nikki, you can go first.
yeah, thanks. I think it might come down to like if we draw back a bit and go, okay, what are we talking about when we're talking about source of truth? So, and what's the problem here? Why is this even something we talk about? And I think in our it happens in all industries, but in ours, it's really, really, really quite easy to understand. You've got a CRM, it has a client, it has the client's address. You
Yeah.
have multiple providers that that client is invested in, and they might have different addresses at different of the providers. So they might have an Aegon policy, they might have an Aviva policy, and their addresses might be different in all three of those places. So the concept of that source of truth is for the organization or that customer client owner to know what that true piece of data is, like what is the correct address of that client. And why it's such a problem in our industry is because there's so much process involved in this, and there are disconnected, fragmented systems. So the client could go into some of those platforms, maybe not all of them, and they could change their address themselves. They could tell their advisor. Their advisor could then be responsible for telling the other platform. So you've got three ways of updating it, and there's a process problem as well as a data problem there. Now, let's say you go to do something with that client 2 years later, you haven't checked the consistency of those data records.
Yeah.
You now, not only do you want the source of truth, you don't know where it is. Or let's say the source of truth might be the advisor who went to visit the client sometime in the last 6 months and knows where they live, and remembers that they used to live there and they used to live there. And that's the problem we're talking about when we're saying we need to be able to know what the source of truth and then be able to track it.
Keep it consistent.
Yeah. And so, okay, so then back to the question, I think it's a lovely, lovely dream that we have to be able to say there's a single source of truth and everything works from it. But we then also have two problems. One is the legacy stuff and then process ongoing. So you can solve the process ongoing you can create a process to try and solve for that ongoing, and you can make sure your staff doing the right things. Tends to be, we all deal with that pain. What's that workflow that's built into the CRM? Is the CRM then starting as the source of truth? How do we reconcile that ongoing? But then you've also got that data migration, that data cleansing process of what do you do with that data for the last 10 years that missed the process? So it's only firms that have had really, really great data processes over the last, 5, 10 years, maybe haven't done any acquisitions that could actually come and tell you and go, I know where my source of truth is.
Yeah.
So it's
They're
pretty
probably
rare.
quite few and far between.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think as well, right? Like because this comes back down to a sort of an architecture view, because you could like there are examples outside of our industry where you have sort of a data lake, data warehouse, data mesh, however we want to use, in the middle, which is your orchestration integration layer, where it then pauses a load of events that are now
Mhm.
enable you to then update all of the peripheral systems. Like that is so expensive in terms of just data consumption and performance cost that actually it becomes cost prohibitive to deliver, and that's why you can't do it because you're then basically real time streaming all data from all applications into a data storage solution to then abstract and then consume back. It just becomes quite unwieldy, and you'll end up having a huge data team just managing that. And as Nikki said, every time that you then acquire a firm, you then have to do that whole process again to try and get them homogenized onto that stack. It can become quite unwieldy. So I think focusing in on the data integration that you need, and then to sort of to Nikki's point, how you then homogenize those three different bits of what you can control and what you can't control, is super important rather than trying to get to the panacea.
And I guess the panacea or the question is like what is the solution for that? And the solution is kind of a business outcome, which is not something you would implement just to solve that problem. But frankly, firms that do have closer vertical integration, that are able to have a more aligned tech stack, adopt fewer systems, like just use one core system, maybe their platform and their CRM are the same thing, you're naturally going to have fewer problems in this space. But
Yeah.
obviously, we don't create a business decision based on an operational issue like that one.
Brill. I'm going to do my best to multitask, as I said earlier. So there are lots of questions coming in, and it's 11:05. So I'm going to flip to some of these questions that are coming in.
Please.
So First question for you, Nikki, actually, based on your response from Claude around the trillion, or yeah, somewhere between
Let me get Claude back up.
60,000 and a trillion different variations. So, question for you from the audience is, when we're looking at these 60 different tech stack combinations, how can we get them onto consistent rails and approaches?
Um, That's a good question, and I think maybe giving a Joe answer of saying it depends.
Yeah,
The key dependency here is probably like how big is your firm? What type of weight do you have with your partners? And I say, I mean, tech partners are we tech partners, or are they vendors? Are they suppliers? But as technology is evolving, I guess there's the bigger firm you are, the more you are looking for a partner for someone to work with you.
yeah,
And it often does come to your kind of outcomes as you pick a core system that you do see in your stack going forward, or something, something that is working well for the business. That's part of your target operating model, something that Joe would talk to more. And then I would suggest you build around that, and you look to, you're not just assessing the merits of the function that tool does in terms of, like, how it produces the risk profiling, but also how it integrates back to your back office. Because if your risk profiler doesn't talk to your back office, which even though a lot of them do, people don't utilize those integrations, you're going to have a very, very big problem later down the line when you try and scale your advice. So I would say collaboratively work with your partners to understand where their integrations are the best.
yeah, yeah, definitely agree with that. Being it's important to us at Seccl. Working in partnership with firms is definitely the best way forward in our view. Thank you. I guess a question that's come in as well, Joe, perhaps one you could tackle for us, in particular me. So next question is, should the largest or large firms jump to developing MCPs to use LLMs? There's no more acronyms in this question, you'll be pleased to know. And should vendors and providers look to assist firms in this journey, as it seems the most natural of AI?
Yeah, okay, and maybe just for people that don't understand what that means. So basically, it means to be able to connect to to Claude, to OpenAI, to sort of Anthropic's old solutions. Can you build basically a layer in between which enables them to interact with multiple of those solutions in a consistent way? So an MCP is basically a protocol which people are starting to develop across our industry and wider industries to enable you to actually interact with these in a consistent way rather than having to build a different connector each time.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
do I think that large firms should start building these? I think that large firms absolutely should start building them, although I would actually expect that your solutions should do that for you. So your vendors should actually be thinking of that. But it will depend again on your ultimate technology stack. So if you've got completely bespoke solutions, yes, you should be looking to leverage an MCP layer and starting to build that within your integration estate. However, typically most of that integration estate is built on something, right? So you'll either
Yeah.
be building it on Azure, you'll be building it on AWS, you might be using sort of a MuleSoft, Salesforce tools type stuff. So ultimately, they will have their own MCP connectors that you can then piggyback off. But absolutely, sort of the crux of the question really for me is, are vendors, because ultimately our industry is quite vendor led, and it probably will continue to be for at least the next 5 to 10 years. Like AI will rapidly speed up software development. The cost to develop applications is going to massively reduce. But what you need to be looking at from your vendors is how AI enabled are they in terms of thinking about MCP or further an A to A or agent to agent architecture in terms of how are they going to be able to interact with not only the LLMs, but also interacting with other applications that are building agentic services. That really should be a key criteria that you're assessing any of your vendors and firms against. And if you go and ask one of your vendors what you're doing around A2A and MCP, and they don't know what you're talking about, it's probably time to start looking elsewhere.
Can
Cool.
I be
Oh,
annoying and dive in?
yeah,
Please.
yeah, cool. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. So I'm all in for MCPs, absolutely love them. But just for anyone who this is a new concept for, an MCP will not fix your data problem.
Yes.
It will move your data problem more easily and faster to the LLM, to the agent. It will do nothing else.
It goes back to that beginning bit where it's about getting this layer right first before you start, yeah, exploring
Absolutely.
other
Exactly. Yeah,
exciting.
yeah, exactly. So if you're there and you don't have your data architecture set, you're not already in Azure or Snowflake or somewhere, you don't have a lake or a warehouse, then you probably aren't going to be looking at building an MCP right now. But then to Joe's point, speak to your partners. That is their responsibility to start building those I guess interactivity features for you.
Yeah, no, good point, Nikki. Good point. Okay, there's still some good questions coming in, so thank you everyone for taking the time to ask the questions. As this question's coming in, I'm not sure who wants to answer it out of both yourselves, so it's an interesting one. So, as back offices are not CRMs and the majority are old tech and have limited capability, do you think there is a future for back office systems? If not, could it perhaps help with a single source of truth data? Who would like to have
So
a stab at
I'm happy to give a view, but because Nikki and I, as I said, we didn't chat beforehand, so we might disagree on some of this,
Yeah, yeah,
which
exactly.
is
See how it
That's why it's
goes.
exciting.
it brings the spice of life, right?
Season
Yeah.
of flight
Um,
coming.
so so my view is like, look, AI will fundamentally disrupt our market, and I think it will disrupt it across all of our layers. So I think it will enable us to deliver non-linear conversational and digital journeys for our clients. I think it will massively improve productivity across our advisor, power planning, and operation staff. And I think, as I said previously, it will massively accelerate the ability to deliver sort of software development and new applications into advisor estates. However, like someone asked me the other day, do you see sort of like an AI only world where like AI is basically run free? And ultimately, the answer is no. It needs a framework to work within, and it needs a data model to be able to understand its constraints of where it can sit. So I do think that you're still going to need CRM. But if I go back to our sort of the picture that we had on this right at the beginning, that's not necessarily a solution that does CRM and BPM and reconciliation and an advice engine and a cash flow. It could be a slightly disparate solution, but I think a CRM component in terms of how do you manage clients and then a workflow that enables both human and agentic solutions to interact with each other is absolutely going to be required. And you're not going to be able to get away from that.
Yeah.
I don't know, Nikki, do you agree, disagree?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I do agree. And we I think there's two questions. There's one, what's the future of the CRM and what's the future of the back office?
Yeah.
Um, and I think like for me, I kind of see a CRM function, exactly the function you're describing, moving to what we call a data management system. And
Yeah,
that being, almost like a hybrid between what's a data warehouse and that CRM. But it becomes your data store, your master record, your source of truth, as we've been talking about. But I see the workflow process layer that used to sits in all CRMs. I see that as something separate, and I see that
yeah,
largely getting replaced by agentic AI frameworks. And allowing for much, much better personalization and guardrails than CRMs actually allow for. CRMs have been built to be so flexible that they're rigid, and everyone hates their CRM at the end of the day. So I see that changing. But in our space, a back office is a bit different to a CRM. A back office is also serving a function of data aggregation, and it's bringing in feeds for income reconciliation, and it's bringing in feeds for data valuations. I do see those decoupling. So
Yeah.
I do think our industry will follow other industries move towards it, in my opinion, the data management layer plus agentic layer. And as per Joe's slide earlier on, our integration and infrastructure and orchestration will be separate.
yeah.
So I do see this space changing.
It's really interesting as well because if you look at other industries, so I in a past life was a worked in insurance. Like the CRM never owned workflow. Like it is a peculiarity of financial advice that the CRM also does BPM workflow activities. It's
Yeah.
not normally seen in other industries.
Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, it's 11:14, so we've got 1 minute. I'm going to ask you both one final quick question, hopefully, which is, and you've got to try and answer it in 20 seconds, which is if there was one thing that advice firms you think should either stop doing or should start doing, what do you think that is?
They should start. They should start start with the proposition and the service you're wanting to deliver, and then work through what the architecture and the applications you need, rather than starting with a vendor and then trying to solve a problem that you don't actually know exists.
And
Perfect.
then adjacently to that, the why. So whenever someone in the firm says, I want AI, ask why. Why are we doing this? What problem are you trying to solve? Not just with the vendor, but what, as the tool or the solution. What are you trying to solve? So yeah, stop telling me you just want AI. Stop saying you just want a data lake. Stop tell us what you're trying to solve. And I do think, all of those decisions do come from the top. I think more than ever, a CEO needs to really understand what's going on in that tech stack. Whereas previously, I think they could generally get away from it. Now they really, really need to understand. So
And I think
start
we
getting
are
more involved.
seeing that they are getting more involved in it in those
Yes, definitely.
conversations. So, Brill, thank you again very much for your time and answers and insight, Joe and Nikki. It was great to have you. Hopefully, we can do this again sometime soon. And thank you, everybody, for dialing in and joining us today. If there are any questions that came through that we didn't get a chance to answer, apologies, but we'll cover those off and get in touch with you directly, either myself or my colleague Will Hamilton, that I work closely with. There will be a quick poll and survey at the end of this session when it closes. We would love your honest and candid feedback, so please do tell us that, because it will help us shape the next session. We want them to be as helpful for you as much as they are for us as well. And then we are looking to do a in-person similar style roundtable event, probably at some point in July or August. So if you're interested in that, please do include that, and we'll get you invited to it. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. Have a lovely day, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone. Speak
everyone.
soon.
Bye.